1.5 inches. That's the only thing standing between living a free life versus getting a felony charge in the United States. Out of every AR-15 barrel length debate, this is the one that starts fights. Just do some scrolling on any gun forum, you'll likely find people tearing down each other's size preferences. And the strange thing about it is that almost every one of them is repeating the same stuff, and it's all wrong. Just ask why the military settled on 14.5, and you'll get the same answer every time. It's the shortest barrel that still lets you mount a bayonet and bolt on an M203. Then the bayonet location decided the rest, because this ring shape has to slide over the flash hider, and the back portion has to reach the lug on the front sight gas block. So the barrel has to be exactly long enough to make it fit. Run the math with that carbine gas system already on there, and you land on 14.5 inches. When the Army tested the early carbine in 1983, they didn't say make it shorter. So where's the grenade launcher in all this? The 203 was added later, and it never touched the length constraint. The launcher clamps onto the barrel ahead of the front sight, so Colt cut a thinner section into the steel to make room. That skinny part is why people call it the government profile barrel. So the length came from the bayonet, and the barrel profile came from the 203. And people who vaguely remember these facts just smash the two together online, and the myth is born. And there's even a coincidence that helped it stick. So the XM177 ran a 10-inch barrel with a 4.25-inch moderator on the end, and it actually served a function to basically mimic more dwell time to cycle the gun better. 10 plus 4.25 lands right around 14.5, but that's in a completely different context. People saw that number and somehow made it about something completely unrelated. Long story short, this prompts the real question, and that's, if they picked the 14.5 lengths to just fit a bayonet, then how much performance are we even fighting about? Or does it even matter? The answer is almost none. Because people love to say, oh, you lose 50 feet per second for every inch you cut. And when somebody actually tested it, using different barrels across 4 loads, the real number came out to be roughly just 25 FPS. So half of this whole thing got mixed up in some disorganized, out-of-context online myths. It's like that phone game you used to play in middle school. It starts with a story, and then by the time it gets to the last person, it's no longer the same story by the end of the day. So that 1.5 inches from 16 to 14.5 costs you maybe only 40 to 90 FPS. A normal M193 leaves a 16-inch barrel around 3070 FPS, and on a 14.5, it's around 2980-ish. And you'll never feel it. Then it gets weird. If you put 2 of the best tests side by side, they actually flat out disagree. Check out this graph, you'll see what I mean. So the tighter one used 6 barrels from the same batch, the same ammo and everything, and only the length changed. So whatever difference showed up came from the length spec and nothing else. In that test, the 16-1 clean, the only barrel to break the 3000 benchmarks, and the jump from 14.5 to 16 was the second biggest in the whole lineup. The loose one used different rifles, different ammo, and different twist rates. So in that one, the short barrel beat the longer ones. Same caliber, they were all 55 grain bullets, opposite winners. So which one's lying then? Well, it's actually neither. So the controlled test isolated barrel length. The loose one left everything else in, and everything else outweighed the 1.5 inches. The 14.5 didn't really beat the 16. The gap between those two specific guns was just bigger than the gap between the lengths. So the deal is, go test using a chronograph on your own rifle and draw your own conclusion. So both are true, and the 16 wins by just a hair in a test environment. In the real world, that really doesn't matter when you're dealing with other stressful events. However, length isn't totally pointless until you talk about fragmentation. 5.56 does its damage by tumbling and breaking apart inside a target, and it needs speed to do it. North of about 2500 FPS is roughly the benchmark. A 20-inch barrel can reach out up to 190 meters. A 14.5 can do up to 125. So the longer barrel buys you 65 meters, give or take. Now let's compare 20 versus 14.5. These two lengths nobody fights about. There is no conversation about it. So the actual fight is 14.5 against 16. It's barely an inch and a half apart. At that distance, the fragmentation gap is almost nothing. There's also a reason the 14.5 just runs right, and it's the dwell time. That's the split second between the bullet passing the gas port and leaving the muzzle, that short window for the gun to cycle. If this is a bolt gun, dwell time doesn't exist, and if you do one shot at a time. So, since we're talking about a semi-auto rifle, it has to recycle reliably without wearing out parts, and that's why this has to be optimized. It's also the hardest thing to balance among gas pressure, gas length, and bullet velocity. In terms of the gas system, they are categorized based on where the port sits, measured from the chamber. So you get these four: pistol, carbine, mid-length, and rifle. Carbine sits at 7 inches, rifle at 12. So a 14.5 leaves about 7.5 inches of barrel past the port, and the old 20-inch rifle left about 8. It's nearly the same. So that leftover stretch is what gives the gun time to cycle, which is why a 14.5 on carbine gas runs with almost the same timing the full-size rifle had. And here's the kicker on the 16-inch crowd. A 16 on a carbine gas system is actually a bit over-gassed, and you see a gun like this tend to have a forward ejection pattern. The bullet sits in the barrel longer, so the port keeps shoving pressure into the action. The gun works harder than it needs to. The 14.5 is closer to balanced. And when the Army finally optimized the M4's gas, they kept the 14.5 and switched it to mid-length gas to handle the hotter ammo like the M855A1. That newer round burns more completely in short barrels too, and still punches hardened steel past 300 meters. The length the internet calls a sad compromise actually keeps doing the job. So if everything makes sense so far, if it barely matters on target, then why can't a regular guy just walk in and buy one? The 16 inches being the magic legal line goes straight back to 1934, and it was a legal accident. The United States was coming off Prohibition, gangsters shooting up streets, and somebody had just taken a shot at Roosevelt, and Congress wanted to clean house. So the National Firearms Act was a knee-jerk reaction due to the circumstance to restrict handguns as hard as machine guns. But let's think about this. If you choke handguns and leave rifles alone, the obvious dodge is to saw a rifle barrel down till it hides under a coat. So Congress closed that loophole too, on paper. Then the handgun part got cut from the bill before it passed. The pistol ban died, but the short barrel rules stayed. The original rifle minimum was actually 18 inches. In 1936, they dropped it to 16, but only for .22 caliber youth rifles already on shelves, because nobody wanted to make a kid's first rifle a felony. And here's where it gets stupid. The reason 16 became the rule for every rifle is the government tripping over its own feet. After the war, they had a mountain of surplus M1 carbines, and they sold many of them to NRA members. Problem is, the M1 carbine barrel sat under 18 inches. So the government had just personally handed 250,000 Americans a rifle that, under its own law, made every one of them a felon. It's the same deal with the pistol brace drama that can potentially do the same to gun owners in America today. Long story short, they quietly dropped the rifle minimum to 16 across the board. It has nothing to do with public safety or science. It's just legal stuff. Tell a gun owner he can't have something over 1.5 inches of steel, and he'll find a way around it. The most common one is pin and weld. The law measures your barrel by dropping a rod down the muzzle to the closed bolt, and a muzzle device only counts toward the length if it's permanently attached. But at least the law didn't say the minimum was 18, because this right here looks stupid. So do that, and you've got a legal 16-inch rifle. People can just eyeball the muzzle device and just do the math to make sure they're over 15.9 inches. A standard flash hider is only 1.5 inches, won't get you there. And that's where the weird lengths come from. And there is a reason why 14.7 is a thing, because it helps a little to meet that requirement. The other route is just to register it with a form called the Form 1, fingerprints, photos, and historically $200 for the tax stamp. That tax fee is dead now since January 2026, though you still do the paperwork. There was also the pistol brace circus, where the ATF tried to reclassify millions of braced pistols as short-barreled rifles overnight, got sued from every angle, and watched the courts toss it. So for now, braces are back to not counting federally. State laws are their own swamp. And then there's the quiet, smarter pick. It's the 12.5. It keeps enough barrel after the gas port to run reliably, unlike the 11.5 and 10.3 that run hot and chew their ports. Only about 150 FPS behind a longer barrel, it's short enough for tight spaces, and it still stabilizes a heavy bullet. So, the only cost is you've got to register it or build it as a pistol. So now you've got all these people lumped into this one giant conversation, and every one of them is probably sure the others did it wrong. So let's zoom out a little. You basically got like 3 camps. One crowd builds clones, exact replicas of what real units carry. They are so OCD, they even chase down the right stamping mark on the receivers. For them, 14.5 is the go or no-go truth, and a 16 is just wrong no matter how it shoots, because it isn't what the soldier carried. That belief alone kind of kept the whole pin and weld industry alive. The second crowd basically doesn't care. They just buy a 16. No welding, no paperwork, swap your muzzle devices whenever, and they aren't over-geeking about it, all right? To them, pinning a 14.5 is just a waste of time, and they'd rather focus on something else. And the third crowd is all about resentment, that an enlisted 18-year-old who can't even legally drink can have an M4. Yet a 40-year-old taxpayer building the same thing is looking at a felony charge. But this is a dumb logic if you really think about it, because one of them is fighting a war on behalf of the US government, and they think he can take it home acting like it's his personal gun. That same 18-year-old on active duty doesn't mean he isn't a civilian when off duty. He can still get into trouble if he's got his own illegal short-barrel long gun at his grandma's basement. So that's why 14.5 became the number everyone fights about. Not the best barrel, not the worst. It sits right on the line between what the military carries and what the rest of us can't touch. The real difference on target is almost nothing, and the law that drew the line was never about us in the first place. Anyway, if you like this type of stuff, be sure to check out these here too.